Hello, everyone. Life is unpredictable, messy, and often challenging. Each of us carries our own unique struggles, whether they're visible to the world or deeply hidden within us. When the weight becomes too heavy, the temptation to share your burdens with others can feel like the only way to ease the load. But today I want to talk about something we don't often discuss: the power of protecting your story. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. For many, it conjures images of weakness or fragility, as though opening up and sharing the most tender parts of ourselves makes us less resilient or less capable. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Vulnerability is, in fact, one of the most courageous acts a person can undertake. It is the willingness to show up and be seen as we truly are, without guarantees of acceptance or understanding. It's the act of saying, this is me, my strengths, my fears, my flaws, and I'm choosing to share it with you. However, as much as vulnerability is an act of bravery, it is not without its complexities. While being open can foster connection, healing, and growth, there's an equally important counterpart to vulnerability: boundaries. These two concepts are not opposites, they're partners in creating healthy, meaningful relationships. Vulnerability is strength, but without boundaries, it can leave us exposed in ways that are harmful rather than empowering. To understand why boundaries are essential, we must first explore the nature of vulnerability itself. Vulnerability is not the same as oversharing. It's not about disclosing every thought, feeling, or struggle to anyone who will listen. True vulnerability is intentional and discerning. It involves sharing parts of ourselves with people who have earned our trust, those who demonstrate empathy, respect, and a willingness to hold space for our truths. When we fail to set boundaries around our vulnerability, we risk turning it into a performance or a transaction. Think about a time when you may have shared something deeply personal with someone who responded with indifference, judgment, or discomfort. How did that feel? Likely it left you feeling exposed, rejected, or even ashamed. That's because vulnerability without boundaries leaves us at the mercy of others' reactions. It places our sense of self-worth in the hands of people who may not be equipped or willing to care for it. This is where boundaries become crucial. Boundaries act as the framework within which vulnerability can thrive. They allow us to decide when, where, and with whom we share our stories. Setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out or refusing to engage emotionally. Rather, it means being intentional about how we open up and to whom. It's about recognizing that not everyone deserves access to our innermost selves, and that's okay. When we practice vulnerability with boundaries, we protect our emotional energy. Every act of sharing requires a part of us, our time, our trust, and our emotional resilience. If we give freely to anyone who asks, we can quickly find ourselves depleted. Boundaries help us conserve that energy for the people and situations that truly matter. They allow us to engage deeply with those who value and honor our openness while shielding us from unnecessary hurt or frustration. Boundaries also play a vital role in fostering self-respect. By setting limits on how much we share and with whom, we signal to ourselves and others that our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are valuable. We take ownership of our story rather than giving it away indiscriminately. This sense of ownership can be deeply empowering, especially in a world that often pressures us to conform or overshare for validation. One of the most powerful aspects of boundaries is their ability to create clarity in our relationships. When we communicate our limits, we establish a clear understanding of what we need and expect. This clarity can prevent misunderstandings, reduce resentment, and create healthier dynamics. It also allows us to identify who in our lives is truly supportive and capable of meeting us where we are. But it's important to acknowledge that setting boundaries can be challenging. It often requires us to confront our fear of rejection or disappointment. We may worry that by saying no or withholding certain aspects of ourselves, we'll alienate others or be perceived as cold or unfeeling. These fears are valid, but they're also a reflection of the cultural narrative that equates vulnerability with unrestricted access. In reality, boundaries are not walls, they're bridges. They help us connect with others in ways that are authentic, meaningful, and sustainable. When we set boundaries, we're not closing ourselves off, we're creating a safe space in which true connection can flourish. We're saying, I value this relationship enough to protect it from misunderstandings and unmet expectations. Ultimately, vulnerability and boundaries are two sides of the same coin. Vulnerability allows us to show up authentically, while boundaries ensure that we do so in a way that honors our worth and preserves our well-being. Together, they create a foundation for relationships that are built on trust, respect, and mutual care. Without vulnerability, we risk isolation and disconnection. Without boundaries, we risk burnout and harm. The magic happens when we find the balance between the two, leaning into the courage of vulnerability while standing firm in the power of our boundaries. When life gets heavy, the natural impulse for many of us is to reach out. We want to share our struggles, seek comfort, or simply unburden ourselves. And while talking about what we're going through can be profoundly healing, there's an important truth we often overlook: not every listener is a helper. We live in a world that encourages openness and connection, which is a beautiful thing. However, in the rush to share and connect, we can sometimes forget that not everyone is equipped to hold space for our pain. Some people may have the best intentions but lack the emotional capacity to support us in the way we need. Others may be indifferent or even harmful, leaving us worse off than before we shared. To understand why not every listener is a helper, we must first examine what it means to truly help someone. Helping isn't just about hearing someone's words, it's about creating a space where they feel seen, heard, and valued. A true helper listens without judgment, offers empathy rather than advice, and resists the urge to minimize or fix the problem. They understand that sometimes the most powerful gift they can give is their presence and their willingness to hold the weight of our story with care. But not everyone can do this. Some people lack the self-awareness or emotional intelligence to respond to vulnerability with compassion. They may unintentionally invalidate your feelings by offering platitudes like "everything happens for a reason" or "just look on the bright side." While these comments are often well-meaning, they can make you feel dismissed or misunderstood. A true helper, on the other hand, acknowledges your pain and gives you permission to sit with it rather than rushing you to move past it. Other listeners might struggle with their own unresolved issues, which can color the way they respond to your struggles. For example, someone who hasn't dealt with their own pain might feel uncomfortable when you share yours. Instead of offering support, they might deflect, change the subject, or even criticize you for being too sensitive or too dramatic. This isn't a reflection of your worth or your story. It's a reflection of their inability to face discomfort, whether it's their own or yours. Then there are those who may consciously or unconsciously use your vulnerability against you. This is perhaps the most damaging response, as it can erode trust and make you reluctant to open up again. These individuals might gossip about your struggles, use your pain as a weapon in future conflicts, or even derive a sense of superiority from your hardships. Sharing your story with someone like this can leave you feeling exposed, betrayed, and deeply hurt. It's also important to recognize that not everyone who listens wants to help or even can. Some people simply don't have the emotional bandwidth to support others, especially if they're dealing with their own challenges. This doesn't make them bad people, but it does mean they're not the right audience for your vulnerability. Knowing this, it becomes crucial to be discerning about who you share your struggles with. This doesn't mean shutting people out or keeping your pain to yourself. It means taking the time to assess whether a person has earned the right to hear your story. Ask yourself, is this someone who listens with empathy and care? Do they make me feel safe and understood, or do they leave me feeling judged, dismissed, or worse? Choosing the right listeners isn't just about protecting yourself from harm. It's also about honoring your story. Your struggles, your emotions, and your experiences are deeply personal and valuable. When you share them with someone who truly listens, you're not just venting, you're creating a connection, deepening trust, and allowing space for healing. But when you share them with someone who isn't a helper, you risk diminishing their significance and, in turn, your own. It's also worth noting that the role of a helper isn't limited to close friends or family members. Sometimes the best listeners are those who are trained to hold space for others, such as therapists, counselors, or support group members. These individuals bring not only empathy, but also the skills and knowledge to help you process your feelings in a healthy, constructive way. That said, even among our personal relationships, there are those rare individuals who consistently show up with compassion, understanding, and kindness. These are the people who make you feel like your story matters and your feelings are valid. They don't try to fix you or offer quick solutions. They simply walk beside you, letting you know you're not alone. But for every true helper, there may be others who fall short. They might lack the ability or willingness to support you. And that's okay. It's not your job to force them to understand or to minimize your pain to make them more comfortable. Instead, focus on identifying and nurturing the connections that genuinely uplift and support you. In doing so, you protect yourself from unnecessary hurt and frustration while creating the space to heal and grow. Not every listener is a helper, but when you find those who are, the act of sharing becomes a powerful step toward resilience and recovery. Healing is one of the most personal and profound journeys a person can undertake. Whether the pain stems from loss, betrayal, trauma, or a deeply rooted insecurity, the path to recovery is never linear. It's full of setbacks, small victories, and moments of profound vulnerability. Central to this process is the environment in which healing takes place. Healing doesn't happen in isolation, nor does it flourish in spaces where we feel unsafe, judged, or unsupported. It begins and thrives in safe spaces. A safe space is more than just a physical location. It's a feeling, an atmosphere, a dynamic. It's a place where we feel secure enough to let our walls down, to acknowledge our pain without fear of judgment, rejection, or further harm. In a safe space, we are free to be authentic, messy, uncertain, and real without the pressure to perform or pretend. One of the key elements of a safe space is emotional safety. Emotional safety allows us to express our feelings honestly and fully without worrying about how others will respond. It's knowing that we can cry, vent, or sit silently in our pain without being met with indifference, criticism, or unwanted advice. In a truly safe space, the people around us don't try to fix us or rush us to move on. Instead, they offer their presence, their understanding, and their patience. Creating or finding emotional safety requires trust, and trust takes time. It's built through consistent actions, not empty promises. A safe space is one where boundaries are respected, where confidentiality is honored, and where the people involved demonstrate empathy and compassion. This means they listen to understand, not to reply. They hold space for our feelings without making the conversation about themselves. They meet us where we are, rather than pushing us toward where they think we should be. Physical safety also plays a critical role in healing. This might mean retreating to a private room, a favorite spot in nature, or even the comforting embrace of someone you trust. Physical safety provides a sense of grounding and stability, which is essential when we're working through difficult emotions. Sometimes just knowing that we're in a place where we won't be interrupted or exposed can make all the difference. For many, safe spaces also include professional environments such as therapy or support groups. These spaces are often intentionally designed to foster healing. Therapists and counselors are trained to create an environment where clients feel seen, heard, and valued. Similarly, support groups bring together individuals who have shared experiences, offering validation and solidarity. In these settings, people can share their struggles without fear of judgment, knowing they're surrounded by others who truly understand. However, safe spaces are not always easy to find. Sometimes the people or places we expect to provide comfort fall short. Friends and family, for instance, may love us deeply but lack the ability to offer the kind of support we need. They might unintentionally say or do things that make us feel worse, like dismissing our feelings, offering unsolicited advice, or turning the focus onto themselves. This doesn't necessarily mean they don't care, it simply means they might not be equipped to hold space for our healing. When this happens, it's important to remember that it's okay to seek out alternative safe spaces. Healing doesn't have to happen with the people closest to you. It can happen in the presence of a trusted mentor, a spiritual leader, a therapist, or even within a community of strangers who share similar experiences. What matters most is not the relationship, but the environment they create, one of respect, acceptance, and genuine care. For some, the concept of a safe space goes beyond people and places it's something they find within themselves. This inner safe space might involve practices like journaling, meditation, or spending time in solitude. It's a way of creating a sanctuary in their own minds where they can process their emotions without external interference. While this doesn't replace the need for connection, it can be an invaluable tool for self-soothing and reflection. It's also worth noting that creating safe spaces isn't just about others providing for us. We can also actively contribute to the safety of these spaces. By setting boundaries, communicating our needs, and choosing carefully who we allow into our healing process, we take an active role in shaping the environments that nurture us. This might mean telling someone, "I'm not ready to talk about this yet," or choosing to step away from relationships or situations that feel toxic or draining. Finally, healing in a safe space allows us to confront our pain in a way that feels manageable. It gives us permission to move at our own pace, rather than adhering to others' expectations of how quickly we should get over it. In these spaces, we can explore our emotions, ask for support, or simply sit with our feelings without fear. The safety of the environment provides the stability we need to do the hard work of healing. Our personal stories are sacred. They carry the weight of our experiences, emotions, and truths, and they shape the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Sharing these stories can be a powerful way to connect, heal, and grow, but it can also leave us vulnerable. That's why it's so important to protect your energy by guarding your narrative. Every time you share a piece of your story, you give away a part of yourself. This isn't inherently a bad thing. Stories are meant to be shared, and vulnerability can foster deep and meaningful relationships. However, not every moment or every person is deserving of your openness. When you share indiscriminately or without careful thought, you risk draining your emotional energy and exposing yourself to unnecessary pain or misunderstanding. Guarding your narrative begins with recognizing its value. Your story is uniquely yours, and it holds incredible power. It's a testament to your resilience, your growth, and the lessons you've learned along the way. Not everyone is entitled to hear it, and that doesn't make you selfish or closed off. It means you're honoring the significance of your experiences and the energy it takes to share them. One way to guard your narrative is by being intentional about who you share it with. This requires discernment, evaluating whether a person has earned the right to hear your story. Ask yourself, is this someone who will respond with empathy and respect? Do they have the capacity to hold space for me without judgment? Will they keep my story private, or are they likely to gossip or misuse the information? These questions can help you determine whether sharing with someone is worth the emotional energy it requires. It's also important to consider the timing and context of your sharing. Even people who care deeply for you may not be the right audience in every moment. They might be distracted, overwhelmed, or simply not in the right headspace to offer the support you need. Guarding your narrative means recognizing when it's not the right time or place to open up, and having the patience to wait until the conditions feel safe and supportive. Another critical aspect of guarding your narrative is understanding the motivations behind your sharing. Sometimes we feel compelled to tell our stories because we're seeking validation, approval, or reassurance. While these desires are natural, relying on others for validation can leave us vulnerable. If the response we receive isn't what we hoped for, it can deepen our insecurities rather than alleviate them. By grounding your sense of worth internally rather than in others' reactions, you can protect yourself from this emotional roller coaster. Sharing your story can also be draining when it becomes repetitive or one-sided. If you find yourself telling the same painful narrative over and over, especially to people who don't offer meaningful support, it can keep you stuck in a cycle of reliving your pain. Guarding your narrative doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or refusing to talk about what you're going through. It means being mindful of when and how you share so that it contributes to your healing rather than hindering it. Another way to protect your energy is by setting clear boundaries around your story. This might mean telling someone, "I'm not ready to talk about that yet," or choosing not to share certain details with people who haven't proven themselves trustworthy. Boundaries are a form of self-respect. They allow you to take control of your narrative and decide who gets access to it. It's also worth considering the difference between privacy and secrecy. Guarding your narrative doesn't mean you're hiding something or being dishonest. Privacy is about protecting what's personal and choosing to share it only with those who deserve it. Secrecy, on the other hand, often stems from shame or fear. When you guard your narrative from a place of empowerment rather than fear, you create a space where sharing becomes a choice, not an obligation. In the digital age, guarding your narrative extends to online spaces as well. Social media encourages oversharing, often blurring the lines between what's private and public. While it can be tempting to post about your struggles or triumphs for the sake of connection or support, it's important to pause and ask yourself, who is this for? Am I ready to share this with such a wide audience? Once something is shared online, it can be difficult to take back. Protecting your energy means being mindful of the long-term impact of what you share. Ultimately, guarding your narrative is about preserving your emotional well-being. It's recognizing that your story is a source of power, and that power deserves to be used wisely. It's about finding a balance between vulnerability and self-protection, sharing enough to foster connection and healing, but not so much that it leaves you drained or exposed. It's a practice of intentionality, self-respect, and self-care. In the end, protecting your narrative, honoring your boundaries, and choosing safe spaces are not acts of isolation, but of self-respect and self-preservation. Healing, connection, and growth flourish in environments where your story is valued, your energy is safeguarded, and your vulnerability is met with empathy. Remember, your journey is yours to share, but it is also yours to guard. By being intentional with your openness, you create space for authentic connections that uplift and nurture you, while ensuring that your strength remains rooted in the love and care you give yourself. Thank you.